Most organizations have that capital trapped in a fixed headcount org chart today. And so helping rethink the org chart and rethink the organization, which AI is really forcing a lot of organizations to do today to begin with.
When we look at things from an organizational perspective, I have seen that when there is this expedited growth, that it can oftentimes start to expose the cracks in the system.
I've hit that burnout point multiple times and even hit a point of self-awareness where I knew I was driving to that point. I didn't really think of a good way to prevent it from happening because I only knew one way. It was running forward towards the brick wall.
If you're ready to stop wasting time on fluff and instead learn how to build unstoppable teams, future-proof your career, and lead with clarity under pressure, then you, my friends, are in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to the Infinite Leaders Podcast. Today's guest has spent his entire career focusing where enterprise growth is won or lost, at the intersection of sales, marketing, and leadership. From scaling revenue at global powerhouses like Cisco, Dell, and Ricoh, to helping high-growth startups like ThoughtSpot and Alation break through the noise, he has seen exactly what it takes to turn activity into impact. Now as the vice president at 2X, a company recognized on the Inc. 5000 for multiple consecutive years, he leads go-to-market teams that prove alignment isn't a slogan, it's a system. John is known for coaching high-performance sales teams, building operating cadences that drive consistent results, and showing leaders what AI is changing and what it never will about selling. And outside the boardroom, he is a die-hard Phillies sports fan who somehow manages to convince his entire family to go on road trips across the country for many live games. So please join me in welcoming John Tecce to the Infinite Leaders Podcast. Welcome,
Thanks,
John.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, I have read all about your bio and we've talked about your results and what you're up to. And it is just so exciting to hear what kind of results that you're producing in the marketplace. And, when I hear 2X growth, it sounds really exciting, but also a little bit overwhelming. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, what does it really take for businesses to double their growth?
Yeah, I think, you hear a lot about people, process, and technology as an evergreen term when you think about driving growth and scaling organizations. I think when you talk about 2Xing growth, X at our core as a company views it as unlocking and reallocating capital towards that growth and figuring out within your operating model where that, in particular in the org chart, fixed cost is locked up and preventing you to pursue a more scalable, flexible, and subscription-based way of driving that growth, utilizing AI, utilizing offshore talent, and being able to transition the approach to growth from a sort of fixed headcount ongoing investment to a more flexible subscription-based investment. Very comparable to what we're seeing in a lot of consumer technology, very comparable to what we've seen with the move from on-premises storage and compute to cloud. It's the same concept for us in terms of growth. Most organizations have that capital trapped in a fixed headcount org chart today. And so helping rethink the org chart and rethink the organization, which AI is really forcing a lot of organizations to do today to begin with.
So when I think about this, it makes me wonder, it doesn't seem like 2X growth would come from doubling activity necessarily. Maybe it's more about removing friction or doubling down on clarity and ensuring that everybody knows what to really be focusing on.
I think it has to do with boiling down and keeping the main thing as the statement goes, but also where a lot of organizations get trapped is trying to scale the way that they've gotten to where they've gotten to, right? And so looking at, okay, well, what got us here is these certain things, and so we want to continue to scale those things without sort of rethinking where do we want to go, right? And as a sales organization, you are then leveraging a lot of the activity that you're putting out there towards maybe not what's going to actually scale the company going forward. I think a lot of it has to do with assessing how much of the growth that got us here is actually part of what the marketplace is looking for versus circumstantial relative to a relationship or a given problem at a moment.
So would you say it's about cadence and alignment and really helping align discipline that can help outperform where the company was before?
I think discipline's a big part of it. I think understanding and being relentless about your ICP, but also not being married to the ICP that sits on your logo slide today, and really getting a good sense of, okay, when we're talking about growing, and I think when I say ICP, I'm referring to ideal customer profile, but also ideal candidate profile, right? The folks that you have on your sales team or in your go-to-market organization, there are very different skill sets that are required to get you to certain stages of growth or scale relative to taking that growth and driving it forward. So in some of the recent organizations I've been a part of, where kind of joining at a time of crossing the chasm, for anybody that's a fan of that book, right? And so figuring out, okay, we've hit the point where we have product market fit and we have enough logos and we have the right funding. How do we scale into that next market, right? And that takes a very different skill set, and in particular, a skill set that is systems based and can put forth a repeatable process of identifying those targets and then maximizing the activity you're doing within the context of those, but also the discipline to not pursue, again, either circumstantial, hey, we landed here in this industry or this micro vertical, and thus we need to continue to pursue that. Well, if you're just not seeing traction in that market, right, kind of going back to what is the core ICP that's going to drive our growth going forward, and then what type of salespeople or go-to-market employees do we need to carry that forward, right? And so at 2X, for example, we started off. We've always sold to B2B go-to-market leaders. When we were a startup, a lot of the folks that were in a go-to-market role needed marketing experience because we didn't have subject matter experts. It was a small company, right? And so that was a requisite thing for a seller. As we started to scale the organization now and added more subject matter expertise, built out a pre-sales function as an organization, now from a sales perspective, we're really looking for enterprise sellers that can come in and understand fundamentally how to assess a target account list, stick to your ICP, apply your activity systems going forward, and really drive more of an enterprise sales motion. You don't have to have any marketing experience to do that, right? You have the subject matter experts internally to support that. And so as the organization kind of evolves, you get to that point where you need to understand what point in time you're at relative to your growth motion.
Are you the leader that your company cannot afford to lose? Or are you the one that they quietly replace during the next reorg? AI, layoffs, and shrinking budgets don't just take down low performers. Even top leaders get cut if they're not seen as indispensable. And that is why I created the Executive Edge Audit, a fast, powerful diagnostic for high performers like you that will give you your irreplaceability index, showing you where you stand and what's at risk so that you can prove your value before someone questions it. You'll also receive an executive risk report that allows you to pinpoint blind spots, strengths, and vulnerabilities so you can close gaps before they cost you a promotion. And finally, you'll receive a 6-month performance accelerator plan, complete with a boss-ready case for why your org should approve budget for your continued growth. So don't wait. Head on over to infiniteleaders.vip right now.
How do you help leaders accelerate scale without burning out the team or the business? How do you keep people moving forward and still motivated and staying true to the mission without just becoming completely exhausted with the speed of change?
Look, I've been there myself. I've hit that burnout point multiple times, and even hit a point of self-awareness where I knew I was driving to that point, and it didn't really think of a good way to prevent it from happening because I only knew one way. It was run forward towards the brick wall. I think, a couple elements of that. First is understanding that only you are in control of managing that, right? The organization will always take more output from you, and even the best cultures, right? And so really kind of assessing for yourself, okay, I see that I maybe have perfectionist tendencies, right? So what do I need to do then if I reverse engineer from burnout? What do I need to do to prevent that? One of those things is potentially seeking therapy, right? And understanding that therapy is not a path for exploring trauma. I mean, it can be, right? But it could also just as easily be, look, everything's great. I'm super happy with my life, with my personally and professionally. But I know that through therapy, I've discovered I have perfectionist tendencies, right? That was me coming to a discovery on my own. It's helped me really stabilize my own ability to prevent that burnout. And then when you talk about from a leader, especially as a leader, there's a lot asked of you every day, and you need to prioritize that for yourself. In terms of the folks you are leading, it's really making work-life integration a core part of the organization's culture and of your team's culture. So understanding that, look, we're a hybrid culture. I'm at our 2X office right now. We're in the office 3 days a week, sometimes four. But also understanding that, look, people have kids, people have lives, people get sick, things happen. Structure your day and your life the way you need to. That will help you prevent burnout because you are in full control of all of those kind of rubber and glass balls that you're juggling.
Thank you for your transparency and sharing about therapy. And I think that we need to normalize mental health inside of organizations and what each of us need to be able to be a whole person and continue to keep going. And sometimes that means taking taking a break throughout the day to go care for family or do the things that you need to do to be your best and feel like you are still living your life in the way that you want to live your life. When we look at things from an organizational perspective, I have seen that when there is this like expedited growth, that it can oftentimes start to expose the cracks in the system. So what have you seen as some of the major challenges in the operating system that might prevent an organization from really being able to scale in the way that they want to?
Documentation, believe it or not, is one of the core areas that I think as you scale an organization, nobody owns, right? Like you're running and gunning and you're going and growth is happening, and nobody has the time nor the potentially interest to really sit down, document out, and documenting could just be a whiteboard, right? But to actually document out, okay, what is the process for how we are doing this today? Where are the gaps in that process? And to what extent can we use automation or AI to help us with this scaling effort, right? How am I using AI in our go-to-market? Because there's so much opportunity. And we're hearing so much about these tools. Well, step one is figuring out where can AI actually help me solve a problem in my process? But that's not actually step one, right? That's step two. Step one is, what are my processes? And have I even taken the time to actually document those in these hypergrowth environments, right? And so just getting that understanding from a process workflow standpoint of what that looks like. And once you start to visualize that out, that exposes those cracks and can help you fill them very quickly, either again, by applying the myriad ways that AI can help you scale it and certainly resource efficiently scale it. But also it exposes cracks in your RACI, your understanding of who actually owns that, right? I think that's probably the biggest area that I've seen those cracks get exposed. And my team's been great about coming to me and saying, hey, I know you asked me to go reach out to this person, but like, what can I expect from them? What do they expect from me? And so, part of it is also just getting that understanding of it's no longer the swivel chair effect, as you're going into hypergrowth, and it's much more of a, let's put into place some of these mechanisms, and even could be an intake form, right? It might not even be a go reach out to a human being. All of a sudden now we might need to build in a monday.com intake form as an example for these type of requests, because now we have to scale to do it. So I think it's really that documentation and process optimization piece, one, and then two, culturally just getting out of the swivel chair effect and going into a more systems-based, scalable approach to collaboration.
That's so good. Well, you mentioned AI, and that, of course, that's what's on everyone's mind right now. What is really on the mind of senior level executives, and how should they be thinking about AI and how to incorporate it into their sales teams and their sales operations?
There's no question. It's the number one topic in most of the conversations that I'm in every day with our clients and internally too. I think there's a few things that stick out to me. One is technology is not a strategy, right? And so when we talk about, I ask go-to-market leaders, hey, what is your AI strategy to help, map to your growth strategy and your corporate strategy? If the answer has to do with a tool, okay, let's hit pause here, right? Like purchasing the technology is a part of it, right? In terms of you have to have the available infrastructure and tooling and tech to take advantage of the technology, but what are you doing with it, right? And oftentimes, of the people, process, technology, triangle, the easiest thing to do is buy the tech. And that's usually what comes first as a result of that. And then the thought process being, hey, well, we'll buy the tech, and then, well, people will use it and they'll want to use it, and we'll come up with ways for them to use it. I'm as guilty as anybody. But what we found really is that this is where these teams are struggling, is they have the technology at their hands. The clock is ticking on these subscriptions, and they don't have the requisite internal expertise, number one, on not on AI. I'm just talking about like systems integration, right? Like, okay, how integrate this with our stack in a meaningful way? And two, how are we measuring utilization of this tool? How are we enabling our teams to utilize it beyond just, hey, here, you have access to this tool now, everybody go use it. It's like, okay, well, there needs to be more of a program around that, right? Someone needs to own that. So that's one area I really see a lot of folks that's heavy on their mind is, hey, I bought this technology and I have a lot of eyes on me on how to best utilize it, and I'm not really in position right now to be able to have that meaningful plan there. And then I think the other biggest area right now is around just a general apprehension around not knowing, right? I see organizations where everybody, if you polled the organization, they would say, yeah, AI is important, of course, AI is the future, AI is this, that, and the other thing. But if you start to ask people, hey, how do you use AI every day? Usage is struggle. And I think there's a genuine apprehension and a fight or flight mentality a little bit to the topic of, do I use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Copilot? If we're talking about content creation, should we pick Writer or Jasper or Copy AI, right? There's so many choices that I do see, and I experienced it myself, right? I struggled with it in the early parts of figuring it out. And the advice that we typically give to clients and that I've taken myself and given to my team is pick one. Pick ChatGPT, pick Gemini, pick Claude. You're going to read stuff about why they're all great, pick one and just start using it, right? And you got to flip your mentality from where can AI help me or where can I apply AI to making it the why would I not use AI approach to that. And that will open up, kind of away from that fear of just the more it becomes a part of your day-to-day, the more you can sort of blend it into your businesses.
So good. So some of the work that I've done in my past is really around change management. And whenever there's a large scale change initiative for an organization, the very first step is to build out the case for change. Why? Why are we doing this? And how is it going to be utilized? And what will be different as a result? What's the current state? What's the future state? So, I'm seeing with AI, it's a very sexy topic right now. I think that many of us are chasing more before mastering better. So it's like, what can we be doing better? And then how can we incorporate AI into that versus just layering on more tools, right? So it's like, how are we going to use that? How is it going to get integrated? And I think there's too many companies that might err towards the side of scaling chaos. Like, it's very easy to pour fuel on the fire without really having the firm foundation in place first. So are you seeing that? Are you seeing that AI is just this new fancy tool, but we don't really know where and how it's going to get integrated into our normal operating system and how we do what we already do?
It's a huge piece of a lot of the conversations that we have around the operating model, in that it's being viewed through the lens more of an add-on than a transformational reason to really inspect the overall operating model itself. It's much easier to do the former than the latter, which is why. And so to your point, it becomes a little bit of a amplifier of whatever you're already doing. But the problem is what you're already doing, as we've previously discussed, is probably not documented, number one, not optimized, even if it is documented, number two, and even if it is documented and optimized, have you re-architected the operating model to incorporate AI, or are you just putting AI at the end as an amplification mechanism and like a bullhorn to whatever that thing is, so you can do more of it better and for potentially lower cost? And that's really where I think a lot of that starts at the top too, from an executive leadership perspective. I think part of that is also overcoming that imposter syndrome of one, it has to be embedded in the operating model, but two, you can be an expert in anything if you give it a little bit of time, especially a lot of these tools. And so the combination of those two things, Scott Brinker came up with a term, Martech's law, where simple concept, right? The pace of technology far outpaces the pace of any organizational change, right? And eventually you hit the reset trajectory. And I think AI has forced a lot of organizations to look at that reset trajectory holistically and say, do we have the right operating model to be able to maximize the advantage of this tool? Not even a tool, really. It's a revolutionary way of everything we're doing. And so I think a lot of it has to do with just kind of looking at that reset trajectory and saying, hey, do we just want to bolt it on to, as you said, well, Sonia, amplify the chaos, or do we want to actually re-architect our operating model to be an AI forward organization? It's not a comfortable topic. It's a hard thing to do, but like you said, with managing change management, if you start with the why and what's in it at the other end, you find it's well worth the benefits to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. So let's talk more about leadership specifically. And in hypergrowth environments, I feel like leadership skills are get exposed, both strengths and blind spots. What are the skills that leaders can really focus on to ensure that they are successful in leading their teams, driving the growth, and having the impacts that everybody's on board to help drive?
I think transparency is a big piece of the puzzle. With a hypergrowth organization, things are always changing. And I think being able to transparently communicate to your team consistently of what that change is looking like, to the extent possible, of course, given certain sensitivities around things like M&A and other factors, but being transparent with the team about the organization's direction, the organization's purpose, the changes that may be occurring, whether it's, hey, we're hiring 3 more AEs this month, right? Like something like that, or being transparent about, look, as we continue to scale the organization, people that had joined 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was basically a completely different company, right? And so performance expectations are elevated as the company becomes, one, significantly more successful with each, sort of year that passes in a hypergrowth trajectory, and two, your bar for success is raised, right? When you are a less not attractive employer, but just a less known employer, right? It's a little bit different from a talent acquisition standpoint versus as you go through those hypergrowth stages and you get more accolades and you become more of an employer of choice, that raises the talent bar, right? And it raises the expectation bar. And so the folks that got there on the earlier side, it becomes a conversation of, look, you are expected to utilize your head start in terms of, if you're in sales, right? It's you probably got a better pick of accounts, you have more tribal knowledge, more experience, and you need to leverage that when maybe there is a new crop of talent that's coming in that might just be at a higher echelon from a skills standpoint, but you can harness that early advantage you had. Or there might just be a point where it's, look, the organization's changed a lot, right? So I think transparency on all those topics is really important. I think over communication as a partner with transparency is big when there's a lot of things going on at all times, being able to synthesize for the team. Hey, you got 15 emails over the last couple of weeks. You didn't even know who 3 of the people that sent them were because we just hired them, right? And you're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? Hey, in our weekly Monday team meeting, I'm going to give you these bullet points. This is what you need to know, right? If it's not on this list, it's good to know and it's helpful to know, but it is not something you need to know and need to be acting on, right? And so that over communication of priorities. And I think the last thing is leading by example, right? It's very difficult to, in a hypergrowth environment, to join a moving train and to understand what is the company culture, what is the expectation. People work hard and they work long hours and there's a lot going on there, but it is on you as the leader to set that example, right?
My experience, hypergrowth leadership and leadership in general is really just about balancing urgency with humanity. Like we are all real people with real lives coming to work day in, day out, trying to maintain motivation to do these things, take action, reach out to customers, keep things moving forward. And people follow speed if they trust who's driving the speed. So, is there that authenticity and is there this example of a leader that they're like, okay, I got you. I want to follow. I'm on board. And I think it's more so about the leader not really being in like a hero role, but more of a systems role and focusing on the systems that can help drive change. And in my experience, that's really about like consistently creating alignment and accountability. So what are we here to do? Are we all aligned on the same thing? And am I holding you accountable to the results that we say that we want? And then even if we don't achieve the results 100% of the time, how do we handle that? Which brings me to my next question actually is, how do you handle, when a sales team does not meet their quota? What do you think is the leader's role in that scenario?
We have a leader here at 2X, Emily Atkinson, who deserves a shout out for bringing the term transparency is kindness to 2X. And I think that's a really applicable phrase to a lot of parts of what we've talked about, but certainly to this scenario of underperformance, right? I think transparency is kindness in a few ways. One, the scoreboard, right? Simply making numbers visible and accessible to everyone, both from a revenue standpoint and pipeline standpoint. So I think it's very important for the team to understand who is at the top and who is at the bottom. Not in a way of meaning to demean those at the bottom or over celebrate those at the top, though certainly we want to recognize them, but so that when you have to have a difficult conversation, it is not a surprise to the person you are having a difficult conversation with. They can read the scoreboard just like everybody, right? And so making that a regular part of the process, certainly celebrating best practices, but also making those that overall performance available for everybody. I also think it comes with a lot of in between coaching, right? So there's the tangible numbers part of it, but there's also okay, let's double click on why might this be happening and getting ahead of that potential underperformance, or if that underperformance is occurring, getting inside the head of that individual, both professionally and personally. Hey, do you have extenuating circumstances going on outside of the office that are preventing you from doing things you need to do? At the end of the day, we all have a job to do, and that's not necessarily a sole reason for dismissal of underperformance, but it's a factor to consider in the process, right? And then also professionally, just understanding how do they view themselves, right? How do they measure success for themselves? You find scenarios, for example, where there's an implication that salespeople are in it for the money, and I've actually found that's not often the case. The money's really good, so that's a big part of it for many salespeople, but there's more that they get out of it, right? Whether it's meaning, whether it's achievement, whether it's simply just the joy of doing the job. And then, kind of mapping back to it's being caused simply by you are not finding that joy you want out of the role, or is it being caused by you are just not able to, there's a messaging problem. So being kind of in the weeds with your folks on that. I think the last piece I would think about, when you talk about underperformance and communication, is setting those expectations very clearly in terms of the tangibles and intangibles, right? So every AE that I've onboarded here and lead here has a very clear picture of, you have a base and a variable compensation model. Hey, you get paid a base, it doesn't mean you're showing up, right? Like these are the factors we're looking at. Some of them are tangible, like pipeline generation and forecasting, and others are intangible. Are you a good teammate? Are you a good internal employee? Do your customers like you? Things like that. And then the variable, of course, is tied to the revenue performance. And so getting a sense for how those people define success for themselves, how they map back to those expectations, it becomes a little bit of a review process when that underperformance occurs of, what the expectations are, right? And we've gone through these coaching sessions, whether it's a film study, I do that with my team individually, of, recorded calls and going through that, whether it's weekly forecasts, whatever, kind of doing a review of that. Hey, we've come a long way together, and we've kind of talked about a lot of this. And that's where you kind of get the sense of, is this just not a fit and this just isn't working? Or are there other circumstances that we can turn this around? Or sometimes it's both.
How companies handle meeting quota, not meeting quota, all of the things, that makes a huge difference in retention and how well you take care of your best employees or all of your employees. And is there room for people to fail? And so knowing that you work inside of an organization that you feel supported and you feel honored, and that it makes you want to keep showing up and taking action every single day. I think that's a really, really important component to retention and ensuring that you really have good team members who want to continue to put in the time and effort on a daily basis.
At time of recording, we have had 0 voluntary AE turnover in our go-to-market organization, which I think a pretty strong testament to kind of looking at that. Now, we've certainly had, performance-related exits as a result of having high standards of being a hyper-growth company, but we've had nobody leave on their own accord, right? And I think that lends itself well to what you just summarized around combination of understanding the performance standards, being recognized for doing that work, having a collaborative culture that supports that development, and knowing that ultimately the organization has your back, but you have to deliver, right? I mean, that's a big part of the performance side of it. And so I think, at least at time of recording, we're doing a pretty good job with it.
Major kudos to you for that. That's truly incredible metric. All right. Well, as we start to wrap up our conversation here, I'd love to hear from you. What do you see as the biggest opportunities and the biggest risks for sales pros over the next few years? We live in this crazy world of change. Like, what do you see happening in the next few years? And what advice do you have for sales professionals?
Yeah, I'm not going to go the AI route because I think it's a very evident and obvious one for everybody. So I'll go a little bit of a different route. I think one of the biggest opportunities for sales is the in-person interaction with your clients and your coworkers. I think, as we've gotten these geographically distributed sales teams and we've moved into a more hybrid working model, and especially in the last 10 to 15 years in the VC-backed SaaS space, where there's been a lot of remote hiring, across the board, it's been very easy to, even post-COVID, to sync back into a Teams meeting or a Zoom. I do not have an on-site with a client where they don't say, hey, thanks for coming. And I never got that before COVID. That was not, people didn't thank you for coming to our office. It was just like what we did. You as a salesperson and a go-to-market employee, by the way, this applies to marketing, it applies to revenue roles, it applies to everybody. Like getting in person is now recognized as elevating the bar and showing, a degree of commitment to your clients. I do see a lot of salespeople that are maybe not thinking through that lens of things. Now, this said, I'm not somebody that's, we talk about the work-life integration part of it. I'm not a proponent of also saying, hey, you need to be on a plane every day, or you need to be, having this level of on-site. But when it's appropriate, I think it's a big part of it. And ditto around looking for your employers, right? And so looking at a place where you have an office to go, where you have people to interact with, where you can be a part of the organization. At 2X, I mentioned we're hybrid, right? And I found I was remote prior for about 8 years. And it was a little bit of and I don't know, do I want to go back to a commute and like an office? I cannot tell you how rewarding it's been to be able to have that interaction internally as well within the organization. So I think that's a big opportunity for salespeople that many, myself included a little bit before I got here, had sort of dismissed or gotten comfortable with as far as just like, oh, I'm always going to be remote. Yeah, you're missing opportunities there. And there's a significant amount of data that is continuing to back that, especially as RTO becomes a bigger part of the corporate world once again. I think the biggest risk that I see is, whether it's AI, whether it's economic uncertainty, name your reason, is very difficult to hide now as a salesperson in the way that it may have been much easier to do 5, 10, 15, certainly more than 15 years ago in an organization. There's too much data, there's too much visibility, and there's too much emphasis on go-to-market efficiency to be a C player or even a B player. Am I saying everybody's going to be an A player? No, but what I am saying is if you find yourself in that B player or C player bucket, it has never been harder to exist there because there are too many mechanisms within which that gets exposed, right? And so I think the biggest risk for salespeople there is not investing in your own development if you find yourself in that trap or in that place in an organization, not being able to look at, as a result of podcasts like this one, as well as other podcasts, an Audible subscription, your library card. We talked about therapy earlier. My therapy copay is like $40 a visit. Like there are ways you can invest in yourself, and organizations expect that. Right. I think it's more of a just commitment to the craft thing that now all of a sudden it's, there's a microscope on that one.
And, I love to hear that even in this rapid pace change world that we're living in right now, it still comes down to the basics, having a growth oriented mindset and being a people person, and like, even with all the changes in AI, I talk a lot about AI plus EQ. Artificial intelligence plus emotional intelligence. So, I think it still is humanity that closes the gap of influence. Like we got to have strategy and influence, and we can use AI as a tool. And there are many changes happening around us, but it all comes back to having a growth-oriented mindset, continuously developing your skills, and staying connected to the people and the topics that matter.
100%. And reminding yourself too that this is a period more than ever where introverts can really also leverage their skills as well, right? In terms of leveraging tools like AI, in terms of having a hybrid setup to recharge. And as an introvert, really being able to scale some of that from a systems perspective as well to maximize your in-person time, but you're not sacrificing that off time either.
Oh, John, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your expertise. It's been a pleasure having you on the show here. Where can our listeners find out more about you?
Personally on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn / my name, JOHNTECCE. And you can find more about 2X by typing in X into your LinkedIn search bar or going to 2x.marketing.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Sonja.
Thank you for joining us for another game-changing episode of the Infinite Leaders podcast. Remember, leadership is not about slogans and one-off events. It's about strategic operating systems, sustainable rhythms, and real results. If today's conversation gave you a spark, do not let it fade. Whether you're navigating change, breaking through organizational roadblocks, or building high-performing teams, take the next step with the Infinite Edge Audit, a low investment, corporate card-friendly plan to future-proof your career and fast-track your next professional move. Need support for your team? Well, we do that too. We empower leadership development that delivers measurable results, team alignment that breaks down silos, and organizational results that actually stick. So head on over to infiniteleaders.vip right now. That's infiniteleaders.vip.